Margaret Chen was 72 years old when she walked into the Portland Community Center on a cold Tuesday morning in November. She was looking for the ceramics class. Her friend Susan had told her about it the week before. Susan said it was good for the hands, good for the mind, good for passing the long hours that seemed to stretch forever since retirement. Margaret had been retired for 7 years now, 7 years of mornings that all looked the same, 7 years of cooking breakfast for her husband Robert, washing the dishes, watching the news, and wondering what happened to all the time she once complained about not having. When she was young and raising 3 children, she used to dream about free time. Now she had more free time than she knew what to do with, and most days it felt like a weight she carried around her neck. The community center was a large building made of red bricks. It had been built in the 1960s and still looked like it belonged to that time. The floors were old and made sounds under Margaret's feet as she walked. The walls were painted a pale green color that reminded her of hospitals. There were bulletin boards everywhere, covered with papers about yoga classes and book clubs and support groups for every kind of problem a person could have. Margaret walked down the long hallway, looking at the room numbers. The ceramics class was supposed to be in room 147, but she had already passed room 142, and the numbers seemed to be jumping around in a way that made no sense. She stopped and looked at the piece of paper in her hand where she had written down the information. Her handwriting was not as clear as it used to be. Maybe she had written the number wrong. She turned left and found herself in a part of the building she had never seen before. It was quieter here. The sounds from the main hallway faded away. There was a large window at the end of this hallway, and the afternoon sun was coming through it, making a long rectangle of golden light on the floor. And that is when Margaret saw the piano. It was sitting in a room with the door open, a black Yamaha grand piano. It was positioned near the window, and the sunlight was falling across its surface in a way that made it look like something from a dream. The lid was up, and Margaret could see the strings inside, all those thin metal lines waiting to make music. Her feet stopped moving. Her heart did something strange in her chest. It was not pain, but it was close to pain. It was the feeling of remembering something she had worked very hard to forget. Margaret had not touched a piano in 47 years. She stood there in the hallway, holding her piece of paper with the wrong room number, and she could not move. She could only look at the piano and feel all those years pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. When she was young, Margaret had loved the piano more than anything else in the world. She had started playing when she was 6 years old. Her mother had taken her 2 lessons every Saturday morning at a small music school in San Francisco, where they lived at that time. The teacher was an old Russian woman named Mrs. Volkov who smelled like rosewater and never smiled, but who could make the piano sing in ways that made little Margaret believe in magic. By the time she was 15, Margaret was good, very good. Her teachers said she had a gift. They said she could go to music school, could become a professional pianist, could have a life filled with concert halls and applause and the things she loved most in the world. Her father did not agree. Her father was a practical man. He had come to America from China with nothing but a small suitcase and a determination to build a good life. He had worked in restaurants and laundries, in factories. He had saved every penny. He had put himself through night school and become an accountant. He believed in hard work, in security, in doing the sensible thing. Music, he said, was not sensible. Music was a hobby. Music was something you did on Sunday afternoons, not something you built a life around. He wanted Margaret to study something practical, business, medicine, law, anything that would give her a stable future. Margaret had fought with him. She had cried and argued and begged. But in the end, she had done what he wanted. She went to college and studied business. She met Robert in her junior year. They got married after graduation, and when she was 25 years old, pregnant with her first child, she sat down at the piano in her parents' house and played for the last time. She did not make a decision to stop. It was not that simple. It was more like the music slowly leaked out of her life, the way water leaks out of a cup with a crack in the bottom. First, she was too tired from the pregnancy. Then the baby came, and there was no time. Then another baby, and another. Then the children were in school and she was working part-time and managing a house. And there was simply no room left for anything else. The piano her mother had bought her sat in the corner of the living room for years. The children took lessons on it for a while, but none of them had the passion Margaret once had. Eventually, when they moved to a smaller house, she sold it. She told herself she did not mind. She told herself that part of her life was over. But standing here now, in this quiet hallway of the Portland Community Center, looking at this black Yamaha grand piano sitting in the sunlight, Margaret understood that she had been lying to herself for 47 years. She took a step toward the room. Then another. Her legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. Her hands were shaking. She noticed this and felt embarrassed, even though there was no one around to see. The room was small and simple. There were a few chairs stacked against one wall. There was a music stand in the corner. There was a bulletin board with information about piano lessons and music theory classes. And there was the piano, beautiful and waiting, like an old friend who had never given up hope that she would return. Margaret walked over to it. She stood next to the bench but did not sit down. She just looked at the keys. 88 of them, black and white, so familiar and so foreign at the same time. There was a thin layer of dust on the black keys. Someone had not played this piano in a while. She reached out her hand. Her fingers were different now than they had been 47 years ago. They were thinner, more wrinkled, marked with age spots. The joints were stiff from arthritis. These were not the hands of a young woman who could play Chopin and Beethoven and make people cry with the beauty of it, but they were still her hands, and somewhere deep inside them, she could feel the memory of music waiting to come out. Margaret did not sit down at the piano that day. She was too scared. She stood there for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway and she quickly stepped back from the piano, as if she had been caught doing something wrong. A man in a maintenance uniform appeared in the doorway. He was maybe 50 years old, with kind eyes and gray hair. His name tag said David. "Can I help you find something?" he asked. "I was looking for the ceramics class," Margaret said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "I got lost," David smiled. "Easy to do in this building. It is room 147 down the other hallway. Take 2 rights and a left." He paused and looked at her, then at the piano, then back at her. "Do you play?" The question hit Margaret like a wave. Such a simple question. "Do you play?" 3 small words that contained her entire past. "I used to," she said. "A long time ago." David nodded. He did not ask any more questions. He did not push. He just said, "Well, if you ever want to use this room, it is usually empty in the afternoons. Nobody comes here much anymore." Then he walked away, his footsteps fading down the hallway, leaving Margaret alone with the piano in the sunlight and the weight of 47 years of silence. She found the ceramics class eventually. She sat at a table with 5 other retired women and learned how to shape clay into a small bowl. She smiled and chatted and pretended to enjoy herself. But the whole time, part of her mind was back in that quiet room, standing next to the Yamaha, wondering what would happen if she sat down and touched the keys. That night, Margaret could not sleep. She lay in bed next to Robert, listening to his steady breathing, and thought about the piano. She thought about Mrs. Volkoff and her rosewater perfume. She thought about her father and his practical advice. She thought about the young woman she had once been, the one who had believed that music was everything. Where had that woman gone? Was she still inside Margaret somewhere, waiting to be found? Or had she disappeared completely, like a song that no one remembers? Margaret did not know the answer, but for the first time in 47 years, she wanted to find out. 3 days passed before Margaret went back to the community center. 3 days of thinking about the piano. 3 days of remembering things she had buried so deep she thought they were gone forever. She told Robert she was going to the ceramics class again. This was not exactly a lie. The ceramics class did meet on Thursdays, but Margaret had no intention of making another clay bowl. She had something else in mind. The drive to the community center took 15 minutes. Margaret gripped the steering wheel tight the whole way. Her palms were sweating. This was silly, she told herself. She was 72 years old. She had raised 3 children, managed a household for 50 years, survived the death of both her parents and 2 of her closest friends. She had faced difficult things in her life. Why was she so nervous about a piano? But she knew the answer. The piano was not just a piano. It was a door to a part of herself she had locked away a long time ago. And she was scared of what she might find if she opened that door. The community center parking lot was half empty. Margaret parked her car and sat there for a moment, gathering her courage. Through the windshield, she could see the red brick building. Somewhere inside was the Yamaha, waiting in its pool of afternoon sunlight. She got out of the car before she could change her mind. The hallways were quiet today. Most of the classes were in the morning and it was now 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Margaret walked past the bulletin boards and the pale green walls, her footsteps echoing on the old floor. She knew the way now. She did not need to look at room numbers. When she turned the corner into the quiet hallway, her heart started beating faster. The door to the music room was open, just like before. She could see the edge of the piano from where she stood. The sunlight was coming through the window at a different angle today, but it still fell across the instrument like a blessing. Margaret walked into the room. She stood next to the piano bench. She looked at the keys. "Okay," she said out loud. To no one but herself. "Okay," she sat down. The bench was hard beneath her. It was not padded like the one she had at home when she was young, but the height was right. The distance from the keys was familiar. Her body remembered this position even after all these years. Margaret placed her hands in her lap. They were trembling. She looked at them and felt a sudden wave of sadness. These hands had once been capable of such beautiful things. They had danced across the keys with speed and grace. They had made music that brought tears to people's eyes. Now they were old and stiff and marked with the signs of time, but they were still her hands. She lifted them slowly and placed them on the keys. The ivory was cool beneath her fingertips. Smooth, familiar. She had forgotten how good it felt to touch piano keys. It was like coming home after a very long journey. For a moment, she just sat there, feeling the keys under her fingers. She did not press down. She did not make any sound. She just felt. Then she pressed one key. Middle C. The note rang out, pure and clear, filling the small room with sound. It was the most beautiful thing Margaret had heard in years. Such a simple sound. Just one note, but it was music. It was the beginning of everything. She pressed another key. D, then E, then F. She was playing a scale, the most basic thing a piano student learns. Her fingers moved slowly, awkwardly. They did not glide the way they used to. They stumbled and hesitated, but they moved. Margaret played the scale all the way up, then all the way down. It took her longer than it should have. There were moments when her fingers could not find the right keys, but she did it. She played a scale for the first time in 47 years, and then she started to cry. The tears came without warning. One moment she was fine, the next moment her face was wet and her shoulders were shaking. She did not sob. The crying was quiet, almost gentle, but it would not stop. She was not crying because she was sad. She was crying because she had found something she thought was lost forever. She was crying because the music was still there, inside her, after all this time. She was crying because she had wasted so many years being silent when she could have been making sound. Margaret sat at the piano and cried for a long time. She did not know how long. Time seemed to work differently in this room. The sunlight moved across the floor. The shadows grew longer, and still she sat there, her hands on the keys, tears running down her cheeks. Eventually, the tears stopped. Margaret took a deep breath. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at the piano keys and felt something new. Not sadness anymore. Something else. Something that felt like hope. She tried to remember a piece of music. Something simple. Something her fingers might still know. The melody came to her slowly, like a face emerging from fog. It was a song her mother used to sing to her when she was very small. A Chinese lullaby about the moon. Margaret had learned to play it on the piano when she was 8 years old. She placed her fingers on the keys. She closed her eyes, and she began to play. The first few notes were wrong. Her fingers went to the wrong places, but she kept trying. She played the same phrase over and over, each time getting a little closer to the melody she remembered. And then, suddenly, it was there. The song was there. The notes were coming out of the piano, and they were right. Margaret played the lullaby all the way through. It was slow and imperfect. There were moments when she had to stop and think about where her finger should go next, but she played it. She played a song she had not played in almost 50 years, and it was beautiful. When she finished, she sat very still. The last note faded into silence. The room was quiet except for the sound of her breathing. That was lovely. Margaret jumped. She turned around and saw David, the maintenance man, standing in the doorway. He was holding a broom and wearing the same kind smile she remembered from their first meeting. "I am sorry," he said quickly. "I did not mean to scare you. I heard the music and I wanted to listen." Margaret felt her face grow hot with embarrassment. "It was nothing," she said. "Just an old song. I am very out of practice." "It did not sound like nothing to me," David said. He leaned the broom against the wall and took a step into the room. It sounded like something that mattered. Margaret did not know what to say. No one had heard her play in so long. She had forgotten what it felt like to make music for another person. "My wife used to play," David said. His voice was soft now, and there was something sad in his eyes. "She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. She used to sit at our piano every evening and play. I miss that sound." "I am sorry," Margaret said. "About your wife," David nodded. "Thank you." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the piano. Then he said, "This room is usually empty until 4 o'clock. The youth orchestra practices then. But before that, it is just sitting here waiting for someone to play it." Margaret understood what he was offering. A space, a time, a chance to come back. "I do not know if I should," she said. "I have not played in so long. I am not good anymore." "Who said anything about being good?" David replied. "That is not why people play music. People play music because it is part of who they are, because something inside them needs to come out. You do not have to be good. You just have to be willing." Margaret thought about this. She thought about all the years she had been silent, all the years she had told herself that music was something from her past, something that did not belong in her present. She thought about her father and his practical advice. She thought about the choices she had made, and then she thought about how it felt to press that first key, middle C, that pure, clear sound, that feeling of coming home. "Can I come back tomorrow?" she asked. David smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes. "The room will be here," he said. "And so will the piano." He picked up his broom and walked away, leaving Margaret alone again. She turned back to the piano. She placed her fingers on the keys. She played the lullaby one more time, slower this time, paying attention to every note. Outside, the sun was starting to set. The light coming through the window turned orange, then pink, then purple. Margaret played until the room grew dark. Then she closed the lid of the piano gently, like she was putting a child to bed. She drove home in silence. She did not turn on the radio. She did not need any music from the outside. The music was inside her now, waking up after a long sleep. Robert was in the living room when she got home, watching the news. He looked up when she came in. "How was the ceramics class?" he asked. Margaret opened her mouth to tell him about the piano, about the lullaby, about David and his wife, about the way it felt to play again after 47 years. But something stopped her. She was not ready to share this yet. It was too new, too fragile. It was like a small flame that might go out if she exposed it to too much air. "It was good," she said. I think I will go back tomorrow. Robert nodded and turned back to the news. He did not notice the small smile on his wife's face. He did not see the light in her eyes that had not been there that morning. He did not know that something important had changed. But Margaret knew. She knew that today was the beginning of something. She did not know where it would lead. She did not know what would happen next. But for the first time in a very long time, she was excited to find out. That night, she dreamed about the piano. She dreamed about the black and white keys, the smooth ivory. Margaret went back to the community center the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Every afternoon, she told Robert she was going to her class. And every afternoon, she drove to the quiet room with the Yamaha piano and sat down to play. The first week was hard, harder than she had expected. Her fingers did not want to do what she told them to do. They were stiff from arthritis and slow from years of not practicing. Simple scales that she used to play without thinking now required all of her concentration. Her hands ached after just 30 minutes of practice. Some days, she wanted to give up. Some days, she wondered why she was doing this at all. But then she would play one phrase correctly. One small section of music would come out the way it was supposed to, and that was enough to keep her going. In the second week, Margaret started working on a real piece of music, not just scales, not just the simple lullaby she had played on her first day. She decided to try Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was the piece she had been learning when she quit playing 47 years ago. She had never finished it. It had stayed inside her all these years, incomplete, waiting. The Nocturne was not an easy piece. It required control and feeling. It required fingers that could move smoothly from one note to the next. It required a kind of patience that Margaret was not sure she had anymore. But she tried anyway. She found the sheet music online and printed it out. The notes on the page looked like a foreign language at first. She had forgotten how to read music. She had to start from the beginning, learning again what each symbol meant. A whole note, a half note, a quarter note. Sharp, flat, natural. The words came back to her slowly like memories surfacing from deep water. She spent 3 days just learning the first page. Her fingers stumbled over every phrase. The melody that was supposed to flow like water came out broken and choppy, like a river full of rocks. She made mistakes constantly. Wrong notes, wrong timing, wrong everything. One afternoon, Margaret was struggling with a particularly difficult section. She had played it 20 times and it still was not right. Her fingers kept going to the wrong keys. The music kept coming out ugly and wrong. She slammed her hands down on the piano in frustration. The sound that came out was terrible, a crash of notes that meant nothing. "I cannot do this," she said out loud. Her voice was shaking. "I am too old. It is too late." She sat there for a long moment, staring at the keys. The room was very quiet. The afternoon sunlight was coming through the window, falling across the piano like it did every day. Everything looked the same as always. But Margaret felt different. She felt defeated. She thought about all the years she had wasted. If she had kept playing, if she had not listened to her father, where would she be now? Maybe she would have become a professional pianist. Maybe she would have played in concert halls around the world. Maybe her life would have been completely different. But she had not kept playing. She had stopped. She had chosen a different path. And now she was 72 years old, sitting in a community center, struggling to play a piece that a talented teenager could master in a few weeks. What was the point? Margaret was about to close the piano and leave when something strange happened. Her hands moved on their own. Without thinking about it, without deciding to do it, her fingers found the keys and started to play. It was not the note. It was something else. Something she did not even recognize at first. Her fingers were moving in a pattern she did not remember learning. The melody was beautiful and sad, full of longing and hope at the same time. And then she realized what it was. It was a piece she had learned when she was 16 years old. A sonata by Schubert. She had practiced it hundreds of times back then, until it became part of her body. And now, 56 years later, her fingers still remembered. This was muscle memory. But hands remember what the mind forgets. The music had been stored in her body all these years, waiting for a chance to come out. Margaret kept playing. She did not look at any sheet music. She did not think about what notes to play. She just let her fingers move, let them find the keys, let them remember what they knew. The piece was not perfect. There were places where she stumbled, where the memory was not complete. But it was recognizable. It was music. It was beautiful. When she finished, Margaret sat very still. Her heart was beating fast. Her hands were shaking again, but not from frustration this time. From wonder. The music was still inside her. It had been there all along. She had not lost it. She had just forgotten how to find it. From that day on, Margaret practiced differently. She stopped trying to force her fingers to do what she wanted. Instead, she let them remember. She would close her eyes and think about a piece she used to know, and sometimes her hands would start to move on their own. Not always, not every time, but enough to give her hope. She returned to the Nocturne with new patience. She stopped expecting herself to be perfect. She stopped comparing herself to the young woman she used to be. She just practiced, day after day, phrase by phrase, note by note. David, the maintenance man, sometimes came to listen. He never said much. He would just stand in the doorway for a few minutes, his eyes closed, a small smile on his face. One day he told Margaret that his wife used to play Chopin too. The nocturnes were her favorites. She said they were like conversations with the night, David said, like telling secrets to the darkness. Margaret thought about this. It was true. The nocturne did feel like that. It was music you played alone, in a quiet room, when no one else was listening. It was music that said the things you could not say out loud. 3 weeks after she started practicing the nocturne, Margaret played it all the way through for the first time. It was not perfect. There were mistakes. There were places where she had to slow down because her fingers could not move fast enough. But she played it from beginning to end. Every note, every phrase, every beautiful sad melody. When she finished, she was crying again. This time, David was there to see it. He did not say anything. He just handed her a tissue from his pocket and let her cry. "It is beautiful," he said finally. "You should let other people hear it." Margaret shook her head. "No, I am not ready. I am not good enough." "Who decides what is good enough?" David asked. "You are playing music that has been inside you for 50 years. That is more than good enough. That is a miracle." Margaret did not feel like it was a miracle. She felt like it was just practice, hours and hours of practice. But she also knew that something was changing inside her. The music was waking up parts of herself that had been asleep for a long time. She was remembering who she used to be, and she was discovering who she could still become. That night, she went home and sat in the living room with Robert. He was reading a book. She was pretending to watch television, but her mind was somewhere else. Her mind was at the piano, playing the knock. Her fingers moved in her lap, pressing invisible keys. Robert looked up and noticed. "What are you doing?" he asked. Margaret quickly stopped moving her fingers. "Nothing," she said. "Just fidgeting." Robert looked at her for a long moment. He had been married to this woman for 50 years. He knew when something was different, but he also knew that sometimes people needed space to find their own way. So he did not push. He just nodded and went back to his book. Margaret watched him for a while. She thought about all the things he did not know about her. The piano, the music, the girl she had been before they met. In 50 years of marriage, she had never told him about any of it. Why not? She was not sure. Maybe she was ashamed of giving up. Maybe she thought he would not understand. Maybe she just did not have the words to explain what music meant to her. How it was not just a hobby or a skill. How it was part of who she was. How giving it up had been like cutting off a piece of her own soul. But things were different now. The music was coming back. And sooner or later, Margaret knew she would have to tell him the truth. She was not ready yet, but she was getting closer. The next day, she went back to the community center. She sat down at the Yamaha. She placed her fingers on the keys, and she began to play. The nocturne flowed out of her, better than yesterday. A little more smooth, a little more sure. Her hands remembered more. Her confidence grew. The music filled the small room and spilled out into the hallway. Somewhere in the building, people were taking yoga classes and making pottery and doing all the normal things that people do. But Margaret was doing something else. She was coming back to life, one note at a time. The lies were getting harder to tell. Every day for 3 weeks, Margaret had told Robert she was going to the community center for classes, ceramics, water aerobics, a book club. She had invented so many activities that she could barely keep track of them all. Sometimes Robert asked her about the ceramics, and she had to make up stories about clay bowls and glazes and the other women in the class. She hated lying to her husband. In 50 years of marriage, she had never kept a secret this big from him. But every time she thought about telling the truth, something stopped her. Fear, embarrassment, the worry that he would not understand. So she kept going to the piano, and she kept lying about where she was. The nocturne was getting better every day. Margaret's fingers were stronger now. The arthritis still bothered her, especially in the mornings. But the regular practice was actually helping. Her hands moved more easily. The stiffness was going away. It was like her body was remembering how to be the instrument it once was. She had also started working on other pieces. A simple batch invention. A Debussy prelude. Songs she used to know. Songs her fingers still remembered if she gave them a chance. She would sit at the Yamaha for 2 or 3 hours every afternoon, lost in the music, forgetting about time and age and all the things that usually weighed on her mind. David had become something like a friend. He would bring her tea sometimes, in a paper cup from the machine in the hallway. He would sit in the corner and listen while she played, his eyes closed, a peaceful expression on his face. He never said much about the music itself. It just said things like "that was nice" or "I liked that part." Simple words, but they meant everything to Margaret. One afternoon, David told her more about his wife Eleanor. They had been married for 32 years. She had been a music teacher at a local elementary school. She played piano, violin, and guitar. Their house was always full of music. When she got sick, David said, she stopped playing. Her hands hurt too much. The medicine made her tired. But sometimes, on good days, she would sit at the piano and play one song, just one. And I would stand in the kitchen and listen, and I would think, as long as she can still play, everything will be okay. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, the last time she played was 3 days before she died. She played Clair de Lune Debussy. She played it slow, slower than it should be, because her fingers could not move fast anymore. But it was still beautiful. It was still her. Margaret did not know what to say. She reached out and put her hand on David's arm. They sat together in silence for a while. "That is why I like coming here," David said finally. "When you play, it reminds me of her. It reminds me of what music can be. A gift, a conversation, a way of saying things that words cannot say." After that, Margaret played a little differently. She thought about Eleanor, a woman she had never met, who had loved music just like she did. She thought about all the people who had sat at pianos over the years, pouring their hearts into the keys. She was part of something larger now, a tradition, a community of people who understood that music was more than just sound. The weeks passed. October became November. The leaves on the trees outside the community center turned orange and red and then fell to the ground. The afternoons grew darker earlier. Margaret started bringing a small lamp to the practice room so she could see the keys when the sun went down. Her playing improved steadily. The nocturne was almost complete now. There were still a few rough spots, a few places where she stumbled, but she could play it from beginning to end without stopping. She could feel the emotion in the music, the longing and the beauty that Chopin had put there 200 years ago. She started to wonder if she would ever play for anyone besides David. The thought scared her. She had not performed for an audience since she was in college, more than 50 years ago. The idea of sitting at a piano with people watching, waiting, judging, made her hands shake. But there was also a part of her that wanted it, that hungered for it. The music wanted to be heard. It wanted to reach out and touch other people. That was what music was for. It was not meant to stay locked in a small room, heard only by one old woman and a maintenance man. One day Margaret arrived at the community center to find the practice room occupied. A young woman was sitting at the Yamaha playing something complicated and fast. She could not have been more than 20 years old. Her fingers flew across the keys like birds. Margaret stood in the doorway and watched. The young woman did not notice her at first. She was completely absorbed in the music, her eyes half closed, her body swaying gently with the rhythm. When the piece ended, the young woman looked up and saw Margaret standing there. "Oh, I am sorry," she said. "Were you waiting to use the piano? I thought the room was free until 4. "It usually is," Margaret said. "I did not know anyone else used it." The young woman smiled. "I am just here for a few days, visiting my grandmother. She lives nearby. I am studying at the conservatory in San Francisco, and I needed somewhere to practice." She stood up and gathered her music. "Please, take the piano. I have been here for hours anyway." "You play beautifully," Margaret said. "Thank you." The young woman paused at the door. "Do you play?" There it was again, that question. "Do you play?" "I am learning again," Margaret said, "after a very long time away." The young woman's eyes lit up. "That is wonderful. My grandmother always says it is never too late to return to music." She started painting again at set. Now she has art shows and everything. After the young woman left, Margaret sat down at the piano. The bench was warm from where the other person had been sitting. The keys still held the echo of the fast, complicated piece. Margaret placed her fingers on the keys. She started to play the note. After hearing the young woman's playing, her own music sounded slow and simple. The comparison made her feel small. But then she remembered what David had said about his wife, Eleanor, about how she played Claire de Lune slowly, slower than it should be, in the last days of her life. And it was still beautiful. It was still a gift. Music was not a competition. It was not about being the fastest or the most skilled. It was about saying something true. It was about connecting with something larger than yourself. It was about being brave enough to let your heart speak through your fingers. Margaret played the nocturne all the way through. When she finished, she felt better. Not because she had played it perfectly. She had not. But because she had played it honestly. She had put herself into the music. And that was enough. That evening, she almost told Robert. They were eating dinner. Just the two of them, the way they had for years since the children moved away. The kitchen was warm and quiet. Robert was talking about something he had read in the newspaper. Margaret listened with half her attention. The other half was thinking about the piano, about the knock, about David and Eleanor and the young woman from the conservatory, about all the music that was building up inside her, wanting to come out. "Robert," she said suddenly. He looked up yet. She opened her mouth. The words were right there, ready to be spoken. "I have been playing piano. I did not tell you because I was scared. There is a whole part of me you do not know." But the words would not come. They stuck in her throat. The moment passed. "Never mind," she said. "I forgot what I was going to say." Robert looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his eyes. Curiosity, maybe, or concern. He could tell something was different about his wife. But he did not push. "Okay," he said. "Let me know if you remember." That night, Margaret lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about secrets and lies and the things we keep hidden from the people we love most. She thought about her father, who had wanted her to be practical. She thought about her mother, who had paid for all those piano lessons and never complained when Margaret gave it up. She thought about the young woman she used to be, full of dreams and music and hope. That young woman had believed that one day she would play for thousands of people, that one day her music would matter, that one day she would be known and loved for the things she did best. None of that had happened. Life had taken her in a different direction. She had become a wife, a mother, a grandmother. She had lived a good life, a happy life. But the music had never stopped wanting to come out. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow I will tell Robert the truth. Tomorrow I will stop lying. Tomorrow I will be brave. She fell asleep with her fingers twitching on the blanket, playing invisible notes on invisible keys, practicing for a day that was finally getting closer. Robert Chen had been married to Margaret for 50 years. He knew her habits. He knew the way she hummed when she was cooking. He knew the way she folded laundry, making sharp creases in everything, even the socks. He knew the way she slept, curled on her right side, one hand tucked under her pillow. He knew her better than he knew anyone else in the world. But lately, something was different. It had started about a month ago. Margaret had begun going to the community center every afternoon. At first, she said it was for a ceramics class. Then she mentioned water aerobics. Then a book club. The activities kept changing, but the schedule stayed the same. Every day, around 1 o'clock she would leave the house and not come back until dinner time. Robert did not mind at first. He was happy that his wife had found things to do. Retirement could be lonely. He knew that. He had his own activities. Golf on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. Lunch with his old work friends once a week. But Margaret had always been more of a homebody. She liked reading and gardening and watching cooking shows on television. She had never been the type to join clubs or take classes. So when she suddenly became so busy, Robert noticed. He noticed other things too. The way she seemed happier than she had in years. The way she hummed songs he did not recognize. The way her fingers sometimes moved on the kitchen table, tapping in patterns that looked almost like what? He could not say. And then there were the lies. Robert was not a suspicious man. He had trusted Margaret completely for their entire marriage. But he was not stupid either. When she talked about the ceramics class, she never mentioned anyone's name. When she talked about the book club, she could not remember what book they were reading. Small things. Things that most people would not notice. But Robert noticed. One night he woke up at 3 in the morning and saw that Margaret was not in bed. He found her in the living room, sitting on the couch in the dark, her hands moving in her lap. When he turned on the light, she jumped like she had been caught doing something wrong. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Nothing," she said. "Just could not sleep." But her hands were still moving, tapping, pressing like she was playing something that only she could hear. Robert decided to find out the truth. On a Thursday afternoon, he waited until Margaret left the house. Then he got in his car and followed her. He felt foolish doing it. 50 years of marriage, and here he was, acting like a detective in a bad movie. But he needed to know. Margaret drove to the community center, just like she said. Robert parked on the other side of the lot, where she would not see him. He watched her go inside. Then he waited a few minutes and followed. The community center was quiet in the afternoon. There were a few people in the lobby, looking at bulletin boards and drinking coffee from paper cups. Robert walked past them, trying to look like he knew where he was going. He checked the schedule on the wall. There was no ceramics class on Thursday afternoons. No water aerobics. No book club. He felt his heart sink. What was his wife doing here? He walked through the building, looking in windows, checking rooms. Most of them were empty. A yoga class was happening in one room, but Margaret was not there. A group of old men were playing cards in another room. No Margaret. Then he turned down a quiet hallway, and he heard it. Music. Piano music. It was coming from a room at the end of the hall. The door was open just a crack. Robert walked toward it slowly, not sure what he would find. His mind was racing with possibilities. Was Margaret meeting someone? Was she taking secret lessons? What could possibly explain all the lies? He reached the door and looked inside, and his whole world changed. Margaret was sitting at a piano, a beautiful black grand piano. Her back was to the door, so she did not see him. Her hands were on the keys, moving with a grace that Robert had never seen before. The music pouring out of the instrument was unlike anything he had ever heard from his wife. It was Chopin. He recognized it from somewhere, maybe a movie or a commercial. But hearing it played by Margaret, in this quiet room, with the afternoon light falling through the window, it was something else entirely. Robert pressed his hand against the wall to steady himself. He could not believe what he was seeing. In 50 years of marriage, Margaret had never mentioned playing piano. Not once. He had never seen her sit at one. He had never heard her talk about it. He had no idea that his wife could make sounds like this. The music continued, beautiful and sad, full of feelings that Robert did not have words for. He watched Margaret's shoulders rise and fall with the melody. He watched her hands dance across the keys. He watched the way she leaned into the music, giving herself to it completely. And he realized that he was looking at a stranger. Not a stranger. Exactly. This was still Margaret, his wife, the woman he loved. But it was a version of her he had never met. A hidden part. A secret self. Someone who had been there all along, locked away inside the practical, sensible woman he thought he knew. The music came to an end. The last notes faded into silence. Margaret sat very still at the piano, her hands resting on the keys. Robert did not mean to make a sound, but something escaped his throat, a small noise of surprise or wonder or sadness. Margaret heard it. She turned around. Their eyes met. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Margaret's face went through several expressions: shock, fear, shame, and then something else. Something that looked like relief. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked. "Long enough," Robert said. His voice was rough with emotion. "Why did you never tell me?" Margaret looked down at her hands. The hands that could make such beautiful music. The hands that had kept this secret for 50 years. "I did not know how," she said. Robert stepped into the room. He walked over to the piano and stood next to his wife. She looked up at him, and he could see tears in her eyes. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Tell me everything." And she did. She told him about learning piano as a child, about Mrs. Volkoff and her rosewater perfume, about the dream of becoming a concert pianist, about her father and his practical advice, about giving it up when she was 25 pregnant with their first child, about closing the lid on that part of herself and trying to forget it ever existed. She told him about finding the piano at the community center, about David, the maintenance man, who had lost his wife, about the nocturne she had been practicing, the same piece she had abandoned 47 years ago, about the way the music was coming back to her, one note at a time. Robert listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions. He just listened. When she finished, the room was very quiet. The sun had moved, and the light through the window was different now, longer, softer. The day was ending. "Play it for me," Robert said. Margaret looked at him. "What the no? Play it for me, please." She hesitated. This was what she had been afraid of. Playing for someone who mattered, being judged by the person she loved most. But Robert was looking at her with such openness, such tenderness, that she could not refuse. She turned back to the piano. She placed her fingers on the keys. She took a deep breath, and she began to play. The nocturne flowed out, filling the small room with sound. It was not perfect. There were moments when she stumbled, when her fingers went to wrong places. But she did not stop. She kept playing, letting the music speak for her, saying all the things she had never been able to say out loud. Robert stood beside her, listening. He did not know much about classical music. He could not tell if she was playing well or poorly, but he could feel something. He could feel the years of longing and regret. He could feel the joy of returning to something lost. He could feel his wife, the real Margaret, the one he had never known, speaking to him through her hands. When the music ended, Margaret turned to look at him. Her face was wet with tears. Robert reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were warm from playing. He could feel small calluses forming on the tips, calluses that came from hours of practice. "I had no idea," he said. "All these years, I had no idea there was this whole person inside you that I never knew." "I am sorry I lied," Margaret said. "I was scared. I did not know how to explain." Robert shook his head. "Do not apologize. I am the one who should be sorry. I should have known. I should have asked. 50 years. And I never knew my wife could play like that." They stood there together, beside the piano, holding hands. The room grew darker as the sun set outside. Neither of them moved to turn on a light. "What happens now?" Margaret asked. Robert squeezed her hand. "Now," he said, "you keep playing, and this time, I get to listen." Margaret smiled. It was a real smile, the first one Robert had seen in weeks, maybe months, maybe years. "Okay," she said, "I can do that." That night, they drove home together in Robert's car, leaving Margaret's car in the parking lot. They did not talk much. They did not need to. Something had changed between them, something that went deeper than words. When they got home, Robert made tea. They sat in the living room, drinking it slowly, looking at each other across the coffee table. "I want to hear you play again," Robert said. "Tomorrow, and the day after, and every day after that." "Are you sure?" Margaret asked. "It is not like the records. I am not professional. I make mistakes. I do not care about mistakes," Robert said. "I care about you. This is part of who you are." The days after Robert discovered Margaret's secret were strange and wonderful. For the first time in their marriage, they talked about things they had never discussed before. Margaret told Robert stories from her childhood that she had kept locked away for decades. She told him about the recitals she had played in when she was young. She told him about the scholarships she had been offered to music schools. She told him about the night she decided to give it all up. Robert listened to everything. He asked questions. He wanted to know details. What did Mrs. Volkoff look like? What was Margaret's favorite piece to play? How did it feel when she performed in front of an audience? Questions that should have been asked 50 years ago were finally being spoken out loud. One evening, they were sitting in the living room after dinner. The television was off. The house was quiet. Robert had been thinking about something all day, and now he finally said it. "I want to understand something," he said. "Your father, he told you to give up music, but you were an adult. You were 25 years old. You could have made your own choice. Why did you listen to him?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment. This was the question she had been avoiding for 47 years. The question she had never been able to answer, even to herself. "It was not just my father," she said finally. "It was everything. The pregnancy, the responsibility, the fear of failing. My father gave me an excuse to stop and I took it because I was scared." "Scared of what?" Margaret looked at her hands. The same hands that could make such beautiful music. The same hands that had closed the piano lid all those years ago. Scared of not being good enough, she said. Scared of trying and failing. Scared of wanting something so much and not getting it. It was easier to give up than to risk being disappointed. Robert reached over and took her hand. But you were good enough. I heard you play. You are amazing. You do not know that, Margaret said. You have never heard real pianists. The ones who play in concert halls. The ones who have practiced every day for their whole lives. I was good for a young woman in San Francisco. That does not mean I was good enough for the world. Does that matter? Robert asked. Does it matter if you were good enough for the world? What about being good enough for yourself? Margaret did not have an answer for that. It was a question she had never considered. Her whole life she had measured herself against others, against the students at the conservatory, against the pianists she heard on recordings, against some imaginary standard of perfection that she could never reach. But what if that was the wrong way to think about it? What if music was not about being the best? What if it was just about doing the thing you loved, as well as you could, for as long as you could? The next day Margaret went to the community center as usual, but this time, Robert came with her. He sat in a chair in the corner of the practice room and watched as she played. He did not say anything. He just watched and listened. It felt different, playing with someone there. Margaret was more nervous at first. Her fingers stumbled on notes that she usually got right, but after a while, she forgot that Robert was watching. She forgot about everything except the music. When she finished the nocturne, Robert had tears in his eyes. I cannot believe I missed this for 50 years, he said. I cannot believe I never knew. You know now, Margaret said. That is what matters. From that day on, Robert came to the community center with Margaret every afternoon. He would sit in his corner, sometimes reading a book, sometimes just closing his eyes and listening. His presence changed something for Margaret. She was no longer playing just for herself. She was playing for someone who loved her, and that made the music feel different, more important, more real. David noticed the change too. One afternoon he came to the door and saw Robert sitting there. He smiled and nodded, like he understood something without needing it explained. Your husband? He asked Margaret. Yes, Robert, we have been married 50 years. David walked over and shook Robert's hand. Your wife is very talented, he said. You are lucky to hear her play. I know, Robert said. I am just sorry it took me so long to find out. The three of them became friends in the weeks that followed. David would bring tea for all of them. They would sit and talk about music, about life, about the strange ways that people hide parts of themselves from the people they love. One afternoon, David asked Margaret a question that caught her off guard. Have you ever thought about playing for other people? Not just Robert, not just me, a real audience. Margaret felt her stomach tighten. No, she said quickly. I am not ready for that. I am not good enough. There you go again, Robert said from his corner. Not good enough. Who decides what is good enough? The people listening, Margaret said. They decide, and they will hear all my mistakes. They will know I am just an old woman who used to play, not a real musician. David shook his head. That is not what people hear when they listen to music. They do not hear mistakes. They hear feeling. They hear truth. They hear someone being brave enough to share something personal. Margaret did not know what to say. The idea of performing terrified her. But there was also a small part of her, a part she had ignored for 47 years, that wanted it, that hungered for it. The applause, the connection, the feeling of sharing music with people who understood. That night, she could not sleep. She lay in bed next to Robert, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what David had said. Being brave enough to share something personal. Was she brave enough? She had not been brave when she was 25. She had taken the easy way out. She had hidden from her dreams instead of chasing them. She had let fear win. But she was 72 now. She did not have unlimited time left. If she was ever going to be brave, it had to be soon. It had to be now. She turned to look at Robert. He was asleep, breathing slowly and steadily. This man had loved her for 50 years without knowing this huge part of who she was. And when he found out, he did not get angry. He did not feel betrayed. He just wanted to hear more. Maybe other people would be the same. Maybe they would not judge her for her mistakes. Maybe they would just be grateful for the music. Or maybe they would laugh. Maybe they would think she was foolish, an old woman trying to recapture something that was gone forever. Maybe she would embarrass herself and regret ever sitting down at that piano in the community center. Margaret did not know which outcome was more likely. But she knew one thing for certain. She did not want to spend whatever years she had left wondering what might have happened if she had been brave. She closed her eyes and made a decision. She would do it. She would play for an audience. She did not know when or where or how, but she would do it. The fear was still there. It would probably always be there. But she was not going to let it stop her. Not this time. Not again. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed about a concert hall, hundreds of people in the audience, a spotlight on a black grand piano, and herself, walking across the stage, sitting down, placing her fingers on the keys. In the dream, she was not scared. In the dream, she was ready. When she woke up the next morning, she could still feel the echo of that readiness. It was small and fragile, like a candle flame that could be blown out by the slightest wind. But it was there, and she was going to protect it. She was going to feed it. She was going to let it grow until it was strong enough to light up the whole room. Margaret got out of bed and went to make breakfast. Robert was already in the kitchen, making coffee. He looked up when she came in. "You look different this morning," he said. "What is going on?" Margaret smiled. It was a real smile, full of something that had not been there for a long time. Hope, maybe, or determination, or both. "I made a decision," she said. "I am going to perform. For real, for an audience. I do not know when or where yet, but I am going to do it." Robert set down his coffee cup. He walked over to his wife and put his arms around her. "Good," he said. "It is about time." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, while the morning sun came through the window and the coffee got cold on the counter. It was a small moment, but it felt like the beginning of something big. Robert Chen had always been a man who showed love through actions, not words. When Margaret was sick, he made her soup and brought her tea without being asked. When their children were young, he coached their sports teams and built them treehouses and drove them to 1,000 activities without complaint. When Margaret's mother was dying, he sat with her in the hospital every night so Margaret could get some rest. Now, Robert had a new mission. He was going to give Margaret the performance she deserved. It started with a phone call to the community center. Robert waited until Margaret was in the shower. Then he called the main office and asked to speak with the director. Her name was Patricia, a friendly woman in her 60s who had worked at the center for 20 years. "I have an unusual request," Robert said. "My wife has been practicing piano at your center for the past 2 months. She is very talented, but she has not played for an audience in almost 50 years. I want to organize a small concert for her. A surprise, something intimate, with just family and friends." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is one of the most romantic things I have ever heard. Tell me what you need." They talked for an hour. Robert explained the situation. He told Patricia about Margaret's past, about her father, about the 47 years of silence. Patricia listened to all of it, and by the end of the conversation, she was fully committed to helping. "We have a small auditorium," she said. "It seats about 100 people. We use it for community events, holiday parties, that sort of thing. I can reserve it for you on a Saturday evening. We can set up the piano on the stage. We can even arrange for some simple lighting." Robert felt his heart beating fast. This was really happening. He was really going to do this for Margaret. "How much will it cost?" he asked. "Nothing," Patricia said. "Consider it a gift from the community center. Your wife has brought music back into that practice room. David tells me about her all the time. This is the least we can do." Over the next 2 weeks, Robert worked in secret. He made phone calls. He sent emails. He drove around the city, meeting people, making arrangements. He told Margaret he was going to golf or to lunch with friends. The lies felt strange after 50 years of honesty, but he knew the surprise would be worth it. The first people he called were their children. Michael, their oldest, lived in Seattle with his wife and 2 kids. Jennifer was in Los Angeles, working as a lawyer. Thomas, the youngest, was in New York, doing something with computers that Robert had never fully understood. Robert called each of them and explained what he was planning. "Wait," Michael said. "Mom plays piano." "Since when?" "Since before you were born," Robert said. "She gave it up when she was pregnant with you. She never told any of us." There was a long silence on the phone. Then Michael said, "I had no idea. I cannot believe she kept this secret for so long." "Neither can I," Robert said. "But now we have a chance to hear her play. Can you come to Portland on December 15th? I want all of us to be there." Michael did not hesitate. "I will be there. I will bring Karen and the kids too." Jennifer and Thomas had similar reactions. Shock, then excitement, then immediate agreement to come. By the end of the day, Robert had commitments from all 3 children and their families. 11 people, including 6 grandchildren, ranging in age from 8 to 19. Next, Robert called their closest friends. The Hendersons, who they had known since the children were in elementary school. The Nugents, who they had met at church 15 years ago. Margaret's college roommate, Susan, who lived in San Francisco and had stayed in touch all these years. Everyone said yes. Some of them cried when they heard the story. Susan especially was emotional. "I knew Margaret in college," she said. "I knew she had given up music. I always thought it was such a waste. She was so talented. I am so glad she found her way back." By the time Robert was done, he had invited 43 people. Family, friends, neighbors. People who had known Margaret for decades and people who had only met her recently. All of them were coming to hear her play. The hardest part was keeping the secret from Margaret. She could tell something was going on. Robert was spending more time on his phone than usual. He was going out more often. He seemed distracted during their conversations. "Is everything okay?" she asked him one evening. "You seem different lately." Robert forced himself to smile. "Everything is fine. Just planning some things for the holidays. You know how I am." Margaret looked at him for a long moment. She did not entirely believe him, but she also trusted him after 50 years, so she let it go. On December 14th, the day before the event, Robert told Margaret they had been invited to a fundraiser dinner at the community center. "A fundraiser?" Margaret asked. "For what?" "For the music program," Robert said. "Patricia, the director, invited us. She said she wanted to thank you for using the practice room and bringing life back to it." Margaret was suspicious. "I have never even met Patricia." David told her about you. Please, just come. It will be nice. You can dress up. We never go anywhere fancy anymore. Margaret agreed, though she still seemed uncertain. Robert felt guilty for lying, but he reminded himself that in less than 24 hours, she would understand everything. The morning of December 15th, Robert woke up early. He could not sleep. He was too nervous, too excited. He went downstairs and made coffee, then sat at the kitchen table, going over the plan in his head. The children would arrive at 3 o'clock. They were staying at a hotel nearby, so Margaret would not see them. The friends would come directly to the community center at 6. The event was scheduled for 7. Robert would bring Margaret at 6:30, telling her they needed to arrive early to get good seats. Everything was arranged. The piano had been moved to the stage. The chairs were set up in rows. Patricia had even arranged for flowers, a beautiful arrangement of white roses that would sit on the piano during the performance. At noon, Robert drove to the community center to check on everything one last time. David was there, helping set up chairs. "How is she?" David asked. "Does she suspect anything?" "I do not think so," Robert said. "She knows something is going on, but she trusts me. I just hope I do not ruin the surprise before tonight." David smiled. "You are a good man, Robert. Margaret is lucky to have you." "I am the lucky one," Robert said. "I just wish I had known about this part of her sooner. We could have had 50 years of music instead of silence." David put his hand on Robert's shoulder. "You have it now. That is what matters." Robert drove home and spent the afternoon trying to act normal. He watched television. He read the newspaper. He made small talk with Margaret about nothing important. Every time she looked at him, he felt like she could see right through him, but he held on to the secret. At 5 o'clock, Margaret went upstairs to get ready. Robert heard the shower running, then the sound of her moving around in the bedroom, choosing what to wear. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, thinking about all the years they had shared, all the mornings and evenings, all the meals and conversations, all the moments, big and small, that had made up their life together. And tonight, he was going to give her something new, a memory they would both carry for however many years they had left, a moment that would change everything. Margaret came down the stairs at 6 o'clock. She was wearing a dark blue dress that Robert had always loved. Her hair was done nicely. She had put on a little makeup, something she rarely did anymore. "You look beautiful," Robert said. Margaret smiled. "Thank you. You look nice too." She paused, studying his face. "Robert, what is really going on? You have been acting strange for weeks." Robert took her hands. He looked into her eyes, the same eyes he had fallen in love with 52 years ago, when they were both young and did not know anything about the future. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "Of course I do." "Then trust me tonight. Whatever happens, just know that I love you. And I did this because I love you." Margaret's eyes widened. She looked confused, maybe a little scared, but she nodded. "Okay," she said. "I trust you." They got in the car and drove to the community center. The parking lot was fuller than Margaret had ever seen it. Cars everywhere. People walking toward the building in nice clothes. "This is a big fundraiser," Margaret said. Robert did not answer. He just kept driving, his heart pounding in his chest, knowing that in a few minutes, everything would be revealed. They parked and walked toward the entrance. Margaret took Robert's arm, the way she always did when they walked together. He could feel her warmth through his jacket. He could feel her heartbeat, steady and calm, not knowing what was about to happen. The doors opened. They stepped inside, and Margaret saw the banner. It hung across the lobby, white letters on a blue background. It said, "Tonight we celebrate Margaret Chen." She stopped walking. Her hand tightened on Robert's arm. "What is this?" she whispered. "Robert, what did you do?" Before he could answer, a door opened and people started pouring out. Their children, their grandchildren, their friends, all of them, smiling and crying and reaching out to embrace her. Margaret stood frozen in the middle of the lobby, surrounded by everyone she loved, trying to understand what was happening. Her son Michael was there, holding his youngest child. Her daughter Jennifer was crying. Margaret stood backstage, her hands trembling so badly she had to press them against her dress to make them stop. Through a crack in the curtain, she could see the auditorium. Every seat was filled. 43 people, all of them there for her. Her children, her grandchildren, her friends, people she had known for decades, people who had never heard her play a single note. She felt like she was going to be sick. "I cannot do this," she said to Robert, who was standing beside her. "I am not ready. There are too many people. What if I make mistakes? What if I forget everything?" Robert took her hands in his. They were warm and steady, the opposite of hers. "Listen to me," he said. "Those people out there love you. They are not here to judge you. They are here to support you. They do not care if you make mistakes. They just want to hear you play." "But what if I disappoint them? What if I disappoint myself?" Robert smiled. "You have already done the hardest part. You sat down at that piano after 47 years. You practiced every day for 2 months. You found the courage to play again. Nothing that happens tonight can take that away." Margaret wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel the confidence he seemed to have in her. But the fear was so strong, it sat in her chest like a stone, making it hard to breathe. David appeared at her side. He was wearing a suit, something Margaret had never seen him in before. He looked uncomfortable but happy. "The piano is ready," he said. "I tuned it myself this morning. It sounds beautiful." He paused, looking at Margaret with kind eyes. Eleanor would have loved this. She always said that music was meant to be shared, that keeping it to yourself was like holding your breath. You have to let it out eventually. Margaret nodded. She thought about Eleanor, a woman she had never met, who had played piano until 3 days before she died. She thought about Mrs. Volkov, her old teacher, who had believed in her when she was just a child. She thought about her mother, who had paid for lessons every week for years, who had always clapped the loudest at her recitals. All these people who had believed in music, who had believed in her. Maybe it was time to believe in herself. "Okay," she said. Her voice was shaky but determined. "I am ready." David went out to introduce her. Margaret listened from behind the curtain as he told the audience about the practice room, about hearing her play for the first time, about the way music had come back into that quiet corner of the community center. "Ladies and gentlemen," David said, "please welcome Margaret Chen." The curtain opened. The spotlight was bright, almost blinding. Margaret walked out onto the stage, one step at a time, her legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. She could hear applause, but it sounded distant, like it was coming from underwater. The piano was waiting for her, the black Yamaha, the same instrument she had been practicing on for 2 months. The white roses sat on top, their petals catching the light. The bench was positioned perfectly. Margaret sat down. The wood was solid beneath her. The keys were familiar, like old friends. She looked out at the audience. She could see Robert in the front row, his face full of love and pride. Her children were beside him, all 3 of them crying already. Her grandchildren were scattered throughout the room, some of them looking excited, some looking confused, none of them knowing what to expect. Margaret placed her hands on the keys. They were still trembling. She took a deep breath, and then a voice called out from the audience. "It is okay, Grandma. We are listening." It was Lily, her youngest grandchild, 8 years old. She was sitting in the second row, her small face shining in the reflected stage light, looking at Margaret with complete trust and love. Something shifted inside Margaret. The fear did not go away, but it moved aside. It made room for something else. Love, connection, the knowledge that she was not alone. She closed her eyes. She thought about all the years of silence, all the music that had stayed locked inside her, all the songs she had never played, the feelings she had never expressed, the part of herself she had buried so deep she thought it was gone forever. It was not gone. It was here. It was now. It was time. Margaret began to play. The first notes of the nocturne floated out into the auditorium. Soft, gentle, like a whisper in the darkness. The melody rose and fell, carrying emotions that words could never capture. Longing, hope, regret, joy, all of it mixed together, flowing through Margaret's fingers, into the keys, into the air. She did not think about the audience. She did not think about the mistakes she might make. She did not think about anything except the music. It was like she had stepped outside of time, into a place where nothing existed except sound and feeling. The nocturne continued, building in intensity, then pulling back, then building again. Margaret's hands moved across the keys with a grace she had not felt in decades. The arthritis was forgotten. The stiffness was gone. Her fingers knew what to do. They had been waiting 47 years for this moment. In the audience, people were crying. Robert had tears streaming down his face. Jennifer was holding her mother's hand, squeezing it tightly. Even the teenagers, the grandchildren who usually pretended to be bored by everything, were sitting in stunned silence, watching this woman they thought they knew reveal a part of herself they had never imagined. Margaret reached the final section of the knot. The melody slowed, becoming more tender, more intimate. It was like a conversation with the night, just as David had said his wife Eleanor used to describe it. A secret shared in darkness. A truth spoken when no one else was listening. The last notes rang out, hanging in the air for a long moment, then silence. Margaret sat very still, her hands resting on the keys. She was afraid to look up, afraid to see the faces of the people she loved, afraid of what she might find there. Then the applause began. It started slowly, just a few people clapping, then more, and then everyone was on their feet, clapping and crying and calling her name. The sound filled the auditorium, wrapping around Margaret like a warm blanket. She looked up. She saw her family standing, tears on their faces, pride in their eyes. She saw her friends, people who had known her for decades, looking at her like they were seeing her for the first time. She saw David in the corner, nodding slowly, a peaceful smile on his face. And she saw Robert, her husband of 50 years, the man who had discovered her secret and turned it into this beautiful gift. He was clapping harder than anyone, his face shining with love. Margaret stood up from the piano bench. Her legs were shaky, but she managed to stay upright. She bowed, something she had not done since she was in college. The applause continued. When she straightened up, Lily was running toward the stage. The little girl climbed the steps and threw her arms around Margaret's waist. "That was so beautiful, Grandma," she said. "I did not know you could do that." Margaret knelt down and hugged her granddaughter. "Neither did I, sweetheart," she whispered. "Neither did I." The rest of the family followed. Soon Margaret was surrounded by her children and grandchildren, all of them embracing her, all of them talking at once. Questions flew through the air. How long have you been playing? Why did you never tell us? Can you teach me? Will you play more? Margaret tried to answer, but she could not find the words. She was overwhelmed, happy, terrified, grateful, 100 emotions at once, too many to name. Robert pushed through the crowd and took her hand. He pulled her close and whispered in her ear, "I am so proud of you. That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." Margaret leaned into him, letting him support her weight. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for making this happen. Thank you for believing in me." "Always," Robert said. "Always." The evening continued with cake and conversation. People came up to Margaret one by one, telling her how moved they were, how surprised, how grateful to have witnessed something so special. She accepted their compliments with grace, though she still felt strange being the center of attention. At one point, Patricia, the community center director, approached her. "That was incredible," Patricia said. "I have been running events here for 20 years, and I have never seen anything like it. Would you consider doing it again? A regular concert series, maybe? There are so many people in this community who would love to hear you play." Margaret was stunned. "Me give regular concerts? Why not? You have a gift. It should be shared." Margaret did not know what to say. The idea seemed impossible. She was 72 years old. She had only been playing again for 2 months. She was not a professional musician. But then she remembered what she had felt on that stage. The connection with the audience, the joy of sharing her music, the sense of coming home to a part of herself she had abandoned long ago. "Let me think about it," she said. Patricia smiled. "Take all the time you need." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Margaret and Robert sat together in their living room. The house was quiet. The excitement of the evening had faded into a peaceful calm. "How do you feel?" Robert asked. Margaret thought about the question. How did she feel? She felt tired. She felt happy. She felt like something inside her had been healed. "I feel like I am finally whole," she said. "Like I have been living with a piece missing for 47 years, and now it is back where it belongs." Robert nodded. He understood. He had seen the change in her over the past 2 months. The light in her eyes. Jennifer Chen had always been practical, like her grandfather. She was a lawyer in Los Angeles, a partner at a firm that handled corporate mergers. She worked 80 hours a week and measured her life in billable hours. She had flown to Portland for her mother's surprise concert, expecting a nice family event. Maybe a little embarrassing, probably forgettable. She had not expected to cry through the entire performance. She had not expected to feel something shift inside her chest, like a door opening to a room she had forgotten existed. The night of the concert, while everyone was eating cake and celebrating, Jennifer took out her phone and recorded a short video. She did not ask permission. She just wanted to capture the moment. Her mother at the piano, surrounded by family, looking younger and happier than Jennifer had seen her in years. The next day, back in Los Angeles, Jennifer posted the video on her personal Instagram account. She had about 500 followers, mostly colleagues and old friends from law school. She wrote a simple caption. "My 72-year-old mother played piano for the first time in 47 years last night. She gave it up when she was pregnant with my brother because her father told her music was not practical. Last night, she proved him wrong." Within an hour, the video had 100 likes. By the end of the day, it had 1,000. By the end of the week, it had been viewed 200,000 times. Jennifer did not understand what was happening. Her phone would not stop buzzing. People she had not talked to in years were reaching out, asking about her mother. News websites were requesting interviews. A morning talk show wanted to feature Margaret on a segment about pursuing your dreams later in life. She called her mother in a panic. "Mom, something strange is happening. The video I posted is going viral. Everyone wants to know about you." Margaret, who did not really understand what viral meant, was confused. "What video? What are you talking about?" Jennifer explained. She told her mother about the millions of views, the interview requests, the messages pouring in from all over the world. People were sharing the video with captions like, "This is what I needed today and never too late to chase your dreams, and I am crying at my desk right now." Margaret sat down heavily in her kitchen chair. Robert was beside her, trying to understand what was happening. "But it was just a family concert," Margaret said. "It was just for us. It is not just for us anymore, Mom. People are connecting with your story. They see themselves in you. Everyone has something they gave up, something they think it is too late to go back to. You are showing them it is not too late." Over the next few days, Margaret's story spread even further. A reporter from the Portland Tribune came to interview her. The article ran on the front page of the lifestyle section, with a photo of Margaret sitting at the Yamaha in the community center practice room. The headline read, "After 47 years of silence, Portland woman finds her voice again." Then the national media picked it up. CNN ran a short segment. NPR did a radio interview. A producer from a popular podcast about creativity and aging called to ask if Margaret would be a guest. Margaret was overwhelmed. She had never wanted to be famous. She had only wanted to play the piano again. Now suddenly everyone knew her name, her story, her face. But the messages were what really got to her. They came by the hundreds, then by the thousands. People wrote to Jennifer and asked her to pass their words along to her mother. People found the community center's email address and wrote there. People even sent letters, actual paper letters, to the Chen family home. The messages came from everywhere. A 45-year-old woman in Texas who had given up painting when she got married and was now thinking about picking up a brush again. A 60-year-old man in Japan who had played violin as a child and wanted to know if it was too late to learn again. A 32-year-old in Brazil who had abandoned her dream of becoming a writer to work in finance and felt like part of her soul was dying. They all said the same thing. They had seen Margaret's story and felt something wake up inside them. Hope, courage, the belief that maybe, just maybe, it was not too late for them either. Margaret read every single message. It took her hours every day. She would sit at the kitchen table with her reading glasses on, going through email after email, letter after letter. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she laughed. Sometimes she just sat in silence, amazed at the power of one small action to touch so many lives. "I do not understand," she said to Robert one evening. "I am not special. I am just an old woman who plays piano." "That is exactly why they connect with you," Robert said. "You are not a celebrity. You are not a prodigy. You are just a regular person who found the courage to do something scary. Everyone can see themselves in that." Margaret thought about this. She had spent so many years feeling ordinary, feeling like she had missed her chance, like her life had become small and predictable. And now, thousands of people were telling her that her ordinariness was exactly what made her extraordinary. She started writing back to some of the messages. Not all of them, there were too many, but the ones that moved her the most. The woman in Texas who had not painted in 20 years, the man in Japan who was afraid of what his family would think, the young woman in Brazil who did not know how to escape her corporate job. "It is never too late," Margaret wrote, again and again. "The thing you love is still waiting. It has always been waiting. You just have to be brave enough to go back to it." One message stood out from the rest. It was from a girl named Sophie, who was 16 years old and lived in a small town in Iowa. She had been playing piano since she was 5, and she was good, really good. Her teacher said she could go to a conservatory, could become a professional musician, but her parents wanted her to study something practical, business or medicine, something safe. "I watched your video and cried for an hour," Sophie wrote. "I do not want to wake up in 47 years and realize I gave up the thing I loved most. But I am scared. I am scared of disappointing my parents. I am scared of failing. I do not know what to do." Margaret read the message 3 times. She thought about her own 16-year-old self, full of dreams and music and hope. She thought about her father and his practical advice. She thought about all the years of silence. Then she wrote back. "Dear Sophie," she began, "I cannot tell you what to do. Only you can make that choice. But I can tell you what I wish someone had told me when I was your age. The fear never goes away. It is always there, whispering that you are not good enough, that you should play it safe, that dreams are for other people, but you can choose not to listen. You can choose to be brave instead. Whatever you decide, make sure it is your decision, not someone else's. Make sure you can live with it. Make sure that 47 years from now, you will not look back and wonder what might have been." She sent the message and closed her laptop. She did not know if it would help. She did not know if Sophie would listen, but she had said what she needed to say. 3 weeks later, Margaret received another message from Sophie. "I talked to my parents. I showed them your video. I told them that music is who I am, and I cannot give it up just because it is not practical. They were not happy at first, but they listened. And yesterday, they said I can apply to conservatory. I am going to audition next month. I am terrified, but I am going to do it anyway. Thank you, Mrs. Chen. Thank you for showing me that it is okay to be scared, as long as you do not let the fear win." Margaret read the message with tears running down her face. She thought about all the times she had wished someone had encouraged her to keep playing, all the times she had wished she had been braver. Maybe she could not go back and change her own past, but maybe she could help change someone else's future. That was worth something. That was worth everything. The weeks passed. The media attention faded, as media attention always does. The messages slowed down, though they never stopped completely. Margaret went back to her regular life, practicing piano every day, spending time with Robert, enjoying the simple pleasures of retirement. But something had changed. She was not just an old woman anymore. She was a symbol of something, a reminder that it is never too late to start again. And every time she sat down at the piano, she thought about all the people who were watching, not in the room with her, but out there in the world. The woman in Texas, picking up a paintbrush. The man in Japan, tuning his old violin. Sophie in Iowa, practicing for her conservatory audition. All of them, finding their way back to the things they loved. All of them, inspired by one ordinary woman who had decided, at 72 years old, to be brave. Margaret placed her fingers on the keys. She began to play, and somewhere, out in the world, someone else was beginning to. 1 year had passed since Margaret sat down at the Yamaha piano in the community center for the first time. 1 year since she pressed that first key, middle C, and felt something crack open inside her chest. 1 year since she began the long journey back to herself. So much had changed. Margaret was 73 now. Her hair had more gray in it. Her hands still ached from arthritis on cold mornings, but when she looked in the mirror, She saw someone different from the woman who had walked into that community center searching for a ceramics class. She saw someone alive, someone hopeful, someone who had found a part of herself that had been lost for nearly half a century. The TEDx invitation had come 6 months ago, a local event in Portland, focused on stories of reinvention and second chances. The organizers had seen the viral video, had read the newspaper articles, had heard Margaret's story from multiple sources. They wanted her to speak, and, of course, to play. Margaret's first instinct was to say no. She was not a public speaker. She did not like being the center of attention. The family concert had been overwhelming enough. The idea of standing on a real stage, in front of hundreds of strangers, terrified her. But then she thought about Sophie in Iowa, who had emailed her just last month to say she had been accepted to the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. She thought about all the messages she had received from people who said her story had changed their lives. She thought about what it might mean to stand up in front of a crowd and tell them, in her own words, that it is never too late. I will do it, she told the organizers. But I am going to be nervous. I hope that is okay. They assured her it was more than okay. Nervousness was human. Nervousness was relatable. Nervousness would make her story even more powerful. Now, standing backstage at the TEDx event, Margaret was more than nervous. She was terrified. Through a gap in the curtain, she could see the audience. 500 people, maybe more. They sat in rows that stretched back into the darkness, their faces lit by the glow of the stage lights. Robert was in the front row just like he had been at the family concert. Their children were there too, all 3 of them, along with as many grandchildren as could make the trip. David was sitting near the back, wearing another uncomfortable suit, smiling his quiet smile. A production assistant with a headset approached Margaret. You are on in 5 minutes, Mrs. Chen. Are you ready? Was she ready? She had been practicing her speech for months. She had memorized every word, rehearsed every pause. She had practiced the nocturne until she could play it in her sleep. She was as prepared as she could possibly be. But was she ready? That was a different question. Yes, she said. I am ready. The assistant nodded and walked away. Margaret stood alone, her hands clasped in front of her, her heart beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. She thought about her father. He had passed away 20 years ago, never knowing that his daughter had given up her dream because of him. She used to be angry at him. She used to blame him for everything she had lost. But over the past year, she had come to understand something. Her father had not forced her to give up music. He had just been scared. The way all parents are scared for their children. He had wanted her to be safe. He had not understood that safety could be its own kind of prison. She thought about her mother. She had passed away 15 years ago, also never knowing that Margaret had returned to the piano. But somehow, Margaret felt that her mother knew, that wherever she was, she could hear the music, that she was proud. She thought about Mrs. Volkov, her old teacher with the rosewater perfume. She had probably passed away decades ago, but her voice still echoed in Margaret's memory. You have a gift, she used to say. Do not waste it. For 47 years, Margaret had wasted it, but not anymore. The lights dimmed. The audience grew quiet. A voice came over the speaker system, introducing her. Please welcome Margaret Chen. Margaret walked out onto the stage. The lights were bright. The audience was a sea of faces, impossible to distinguish. Margaret walked to the center of the stage, where a microphone stood waiting for her. Next to the microphone was the piano, a beautiful concert grand, polished and gleaming under the lights. She had asked to speak before she played. She wanted the audience to understand the context. She wanted them to know what the music meant. Margaret adjusted the microphone. She cleared her throat. She looked out at the audience and began to speak. When I was 25 years old, I sat down at a piano and played for the last time. I was pregnant with my first child. My father had told me that music was not practical, that I needed to focus on real life, and I listened to him. I closed the lid on the piano, and I did not open one again for 47 years. She paused. The audience was silent, waiting. I thought I was being responsible. I thought I was doing the right thing. But what I was really doing was burying a part of myself, the part that felt most alive, the part that made me who I was. I buried it so deep that I forgot it existed. She told them about finding the piano at the community center, about David and his wife Eleanor, about the nocturne she had been learning when she quit, the same piece she had finally completed 47 years later, about Robert discovering his secret, about the family concert, about the viral video and the messages from thousands of people around the world. Those messages changed me, Margaret said. I realized that my story was not just about me. It was about everyone who has ever given up something they loved. Everyone who has ever listened to the voice that says you are too old, too late, too practical. Everyone who has ever looked at their dreams and decided they were not worth chasing. She paused again. She could feel the emotion building in her chest, the way it always did when she talked about this. I am here to tell you that the voice is wrong. It is never too late. The thing you love is still waiting for you. It has been waiting all along. You just have to be brave enough to go back to it. Margaret turned and walked to the piano. She sat down on the bench. She placed her hands on the keys. The audience was completely silent. This is the piece I was learning when I quit playing. she said into the microphone. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. I never finished it. For 47 years, it stayed inside me, incomplete, but I finished it last year, and tonight, I want to share it with you. She closed her eyes. She thought about all the years of silence, all the music that had stayed locked inside her, all the people who had told her it was not too late. She thought about her mother and her father, about Mrs. Volkov, about Robert and her children and grandchildren, about David and Eleanor, about Sophie in Iowa and the woman in Texas and the man in Japan and all the thousands of people who had reached out to tell her that her story had touched them. She thought about the young woman she had been at 25, full of dreams and music and hope, and she thought about the woman she was now, at 73, finally ready to honor those dreams. Margaret began to play. The nocturne flowed out, perfect and beautiful. Every note was in place. Every phrase was shaped with care. The music filled the auditorium, rising up to the ceiling, spilling out into the world. Margaret did not think about the audience. She did not think about the cameras recording the performance. She did not think about anything except the music. It was just her and the piano, the way it had always been, the way it was always meant to be. The piece built in intensity, then pulled back, then built again. The melody soared and dipped, carrying all the emotions that Margaret had kept bottled up for nearly 50 years. Longing, regret, hope, joy, all of it, finally finding its voice. When she reached the final section, Margaret felt tears on her cheeks, but she did not stop. She played through the tears, letting them fall, letting the music speak for her. The last notes rang out, hanging in the air, then silence. For a moment, nothing happened. The audience sat frozen, caught in the spell of the music. Then they rose, all 500 of them, standing, applauding, some of them crying. The sound washed over Margaret like a wave, lifting her up, carrying her forward. She stood from the piano bench. She faced the audience. She bowed, the way she used to bow when she was young, when she still believed that music was everything. And she understood, finally, that she had been right. Music was everything. It had always been everything. She had just forgotten for a while. The applause continued. Margaret looked out at the sea of faces and felt something she had not felt in a very long time: peace, completeness, the sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. After the event, people lined up to talk to her. They wanted to shake her hand, to tell her their stories, to thank her for sharing hers. Margaret listened to each one. A woman who had given up dancing, a man who had stopped writing poetry, a teenager who was afraid to pursue her dreams. It is never too late, Margaret told each of them. The thing you love is still waiting. Later that night, Robert drove her home. They did not talk much. They did not need to. They had been married for 50 years. They knew how to be together in silence. When they got home, Margaret did not go to bed. She walked into the living room where the piano Robert had bought her last year stood waiting. She turned on a small lamp. She sat down on the bench. "What are you doing?" Robert asked from the doorway. Margaret smiled at him.